James, you say you're not a spokesman for the Labour Party, and I do appreciate that, but that surely you have an opinion on what happened last night when a third of Keir Starmer's party had a complete attack of narcissism. And
I'm sorry, what?
An attack.
I'm sorry, an attack of narcissism?
Honestly, I've not heard a single Labour... I mean, Jess Phillips' explanation, I think the word "I" was in her letter to Keir Starmer, something like 35 times, and Gaza was in 3 times. It was about, my head and my heart won't let me do this. My head and my heart is with my constituents. There was no coherent argument as to why they did what they did last night. Now, you're not a spokesman for the Labour Party, you've just said that, but what do you think about how do you think Keir Starmer's going to manage in the future? If he's got a third of his MPs who are out on the airwaves bleating about how upset they were and how tortured they were to vote without a coherent argument as to why, how do you think the future looks for Keir Starmer?
So I don't think they were bleating. I think that a number of MPs voted against the party's wishes to vote in favour of a ceasefire because that is what the overwhelming majority of people in Britain want. That's what many, many constituents want, that they'll be writing to their MPs, calling their MPs, emailing their MPs, asking them, please stand up for a ceasefire, because most people in the country can see that you don't respond to the unjustifiable killing of one group of people by killing many, many more people.
That's what war is, James. War is. If you're a terror unit and you go in and you attack and you kill people in another country, that country will attack you. That's what war is. That's how it is. That's how it works. If you don't want to be attacked back, don't cross the border and kill with your bare hands 1,400 people. If Hamas didn't want this war, they shouldn't have done it. OK,
so there are 2 things to say to that. The first is this is not 2 countries that are at war with one another. Israel is a state. Palestine is not a state. It's an occupied territory. So it's not the case.
Occupied by Hamas?
No.
Gaza occupied.
Gaza, in international law, is occupied by Israel, as is the West Bank. So it's not the case of one country invading another country. There isn't a sovereign border.
No, James, you're trying to use clever words. That is exactly what happened. Hamas, who are Palestinians, moved out Gaza into Israel and murdered 1,400 people.
Let me come to the main reason why the majority of people in Britain, in the US and around the world support a ceasefire. Because they can see that however horrific the events of the 7th of October may have been, the response to them is not to obliterate Gaza. It's not to bomb hospitals. It's not to kill children. That not only is an unjust and disproportionate response, but it also doesn't lead to any long-term peace. It doesn't give long-term security to the citizens of Israel either, because do you think that...
But it defends Israel. They're taking out Hamas. They are not targeting civilians. They are targeting Hamas.
Well, if they're
taking out Hamas to protect and defend Israeli citizens.
If they're targeting Hamas, they're doing a remarkable job of killing children and really...
It's appalling, James. I share that. I share that anguish. It is appalling.
So 11,000 or so...
It's awful, but, you know...
Over 11,000 people...
People are the consequence of war.
But
they are the casualties of war.
Yes, right. And so what we're saying, and what most people in this country are saying, and therefore some MPs are saying, is to call for not war, but for peace. A ceasefire, and then the beginning of some kind of process.
But a ceasefire Hamas would not acknowledge or recognise a ceasefire.
Well, firstly, you don't know that, because Hamas has also offered short-term ceasefires in exchange for some hostages, and you have to start from somewhere. But also, could Israel defend itself, defend its citizens from future Hamas attacks without destroying... You know, the majority of the buildings in Gaza now have been turned to rubble.
It's not the majority.
Well, over half of the homes are either destroyed or severely damaged, according. I mean,
because they were used by Hamas.
All of the homes
who are also in the tunnels.
I'm sorry. All of the homes in Gaza. If go to the Economist's website, you know that far left publication, The Economist. They have done an analysis of aerial and satellite photography, which shows you the extent of the destruction of this place. Now, could Israel have found another way to defend its citizens rather than needlessly killing all of these civilians in Gaza? And the answer is yes, of course they could. So rather than going on about MPs speaking for themselves and bleating, they're speaking up for the basic cause of peace.
I wish they'd articulated that that's what they were doing, but that isn't what they did.
Well, it's not our fault that our MPs aren't very good at speaking, but that is what their vote meant.
I'm going to have to go to Madeline, but just on your last point, that the IDF are not bombing homes, they're bombing Hamas targets who are using civilians as their shields, and most of them are in the tunnels anyway. Madeline.
Well, what I would say is that I don't agree with James on this point, but I hate to think that we could ever be in a situation where arguing for a ceasefire is not considered a perfectly respectable opinion. It's not extremist, it's not beyond the pale. I mean, I think that when people hear the word ceasefire, they probably think...
So do you think we have to have a ceasefire and then watch Hamas not honour that ceasefire and then...
No, I think it's very easy for us in a safe country like this to say to Israel, a country which, although I know it's obviously has much more firepower than Hamas, it is surrounded by hostile countries that wish it harm. And I can understand the reaction. I mean, when it comes to I think when people hear the word ceasefire, they think, I'd like a ceasefire because we all want this war to end. However, the implications of that ceasefire might well be that, for example, Israel ceases its operations, Hamas continues, it gives them an opportunity to regroup in their tunnels, to resupply their soldiers. They could end this now if they gave back the hostages, but they're not going to do that.
They're not.
And, you know, I think it's very easy for us. I mean, sometimes these votes in Parliament where you have MPs, you know, in constituencies across the UK telling Israel what to do, it kind of reminds me of, you know, at university when the JCR would get together and say Israel does not have a right to exist. Like, well, you know, Israel, they've got their own population to defend, and they're surrounded by countries, some of which have semi or quasi-genocidal ambitions towards Israel, you know?
Yeah, I do.
In that context, it starts to look a bit different.